Namaskar, Swadika. My name is Aparna Patwardhan. I'm the director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Embassy of India, Bangkok. On 21st June, we are celebrating the 7th International Day of Yoga. Yoga, as you know, is an ancient physical, mental, and spiritual practice which has its origins in India. The philosophy of the Indian civilization has been Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is one family. Today, when there is a global health crisis in the form of COVID-19, India offers its traditional practices of yoga and Ayurveda and its beneficial impacts on the immune system to the world. Studies reveal that yoga has played a very important role in COVID-19 management and in reducing stress during lockdown. Yoga has emerged as an effective self-management strategy to cope with stress, anxiety, and depression and maintain well-being during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we have invited Dr. Vinay Chandra Banavati to speak on a relevant topic, psychological health and well-being through yoga. Before we start the session, we'll play a message from our ambassador to Thailand, Her Excellency Mrs. Suchitra Durai.
Namaskar, Sadika. On the 21st of June 2021, the world will be celebrating the International Day of Yoga. This will be the 7th International Day of Yoga. In end 2014, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi at the UN General Assembly made a proposal for the international community to get together and celebrate yoga on the 21st of June, which also happens to be the summer solstice or the longest day in the northern hemisphere before the sun changes its course and goes from the northern to the southern hemisphere. Yoga, as many of you would be aware, is a gift of the ancient Indian tradition. Yoga means union in Sanskrit. It is a union of the mind and the body, of humanity with nature, of the individual with society. So the concept of union, balance, is very much, an intrinsic part of yoga. So yoga, people are aware of the yogasanas or the physical postures, but yoga comprises essentially of three aspects: the yogasanas, the dhyana or meditation, or pranayama, or the breathing control or exercises. Yoga has been found to be very effective in many areas, particularly in dealing with stress. You have the stress of modern life. Almost every individual goes through this. Students, before their exams. You have housewives, homemakers dealing with stress at home. You have office goers dealing with stress. So yoga helps you really very effectively to deal with stress. It helps also to deal with non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, and has been found to be very effective in pain management. So there are many good benefits from practicing yoga, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic period. Yoga, because of the fact that it is not dependent on any equipment, so you don't have to go to a gym. The gyms are closed, even public parks are closed, but you can very effectively practice yoga at home. All you need is a little bit of peace and quiet, not too much space, just enough for you to do your basic asanas and a yoga mat. That is all that you need. No big equipment, fancy equipment for you to practice yoga. So the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Bangkok will be organizing a yoga series from the 7th of June to the 18th of June at 11 a.m. every day. In addition, the embassy is also uh, holding a contest in which you can participate. There are several prizes which have already been announced. Not just a video contest, but also quizzes are being organized. So please do participate. And on the 19th, the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Bangkok, will also be organizing a talk on psychological health and well-being through yoga. So this year, the theme which has been set by the Government of India is that be with yoga, be at home. So you can practice all these things from home. We will be doing a live telecast of the yoga program on the 20th of June 2021, which is a Sunday. The embassy will be organizing this, and so please join us online. Thank you very much. Namaskar. Khapon kha.
Dr. Vinay Chandra Banavati is the director of Indica Yoga, a platform that offers authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga experiences across the world. He holds a PhD on psychological insights in the Vedas from Pondicherry University, besides masters in Sanskrit, English, yogic science, and applied psychology. Dr. Vinay Chandra is a dedicated teacher who travels across the world conducting courses, lectures, and workshops on a unique blend of yoga, psychology, and Sanskrit. He's a guest faculty and resource person at various universities and yoga associations. His publications include a report on standardization of yoga terminologies for WHO, a book he co-edited titled Perspectives on Indian Psychology, another book co-authored titled Happiness, Indic Perspectives, besides articles, papers, booklets on yoga, Indian psychology, culture, and spirituality. Welcome to our session, Dr. Vinay Chandra. I invite you to speak on today's topic.
Thank you. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to Her Excellency Ms. Suchitra Dorai, the Ambassador of India to Thailand, for taking forward the celebrations of International Day of Yoga, and also Ms. Aparna Patwardhanji, who is the head of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at Bangkok. So thank you, Aparna ji, for this generous introduction and also the opportunity to share my thoughts on yoga with all my friends in Thailand. Thank you. So while we have been discussing about yoga, there are multiple facets to the practice as well as benefits of yoga. So we'll just explore one of the important aspects which will have a great impact on all other aspects too. So the focus of our talk, though we would bring in many aspects, the focus would largely be around psychological well-being. So maybe with this, I'll just start sharing my slide. So while there are multiple facets to yoga, in our session today, I'd like to focus a little more on the psychological well-being and how yoga contributes towards it and how this would have implications at all other levels. So with this context, I would like to start with a question that I want to primarily ask you all is about what has this pandemic situation taught us all? Whether we want it or not, this is a big question that we are all encountering. I mean, this is a situation that is hitting on our face, trying to teach us something. So, though it's an unfortunate incident, we may wish, however strongly we may wish that it goes away, yet that it still is there and it is coming to us again and again. So, faced with this situation, are there any learnings that we could carry from this situation is the question. So if we reflect on this for a moment, what are the most important lessons that we might take home with this situation or in this situation? I'm sure most of you agree that there are common pointers that all of us agree that these would be our learnings from this situation. One, the interconnectedness of the whole world. I mean, just see how it started, how it spread, how it impacted, how one part of the world can create such a big impact on the other part of the world, or within not even just parts of the world or different continents, within a country, within a small society, within our own street, within our own family. We have seen one person affected, and from that person, the others getting affected. So, what we thought are all unconnected entities. Now, all of a sudden, we seem to recognize a very strong interconnectedness that exists between us and the family members, between us and our neighborhood, between us and our communities, between us and other cities and other parts of the world. So, if there is one thing that we could easily recognize today is the interconnectedness of the world. No doubt science was pointing towards it. Philosophy, especially Indian philosophy, the Vedanta system has always pointed towards it, that we are all connected. What we see is an extension of our own experience elsewhere, was the philosophical insight that we get in the Indian thought. And this seems to be forcefully projected on us through this situation. In fact, what the science used to say, especially the theory of chaos, if a butterfly flutters its wings in China, it's going to rain in South America. This was a saying, but today, literally, we have realized this. If one flutter happens in one part, how vulnerable or how impactful it would be on all the other parts of the world. This is definitely a great learning, and all our solutions that we seek should also recognize the importance of this idea. So, keeping that in mind, let's proceed to the next one. The second important learning is we are all as vulnerable or as strong as anyone else. We have seen people across socio-economic status, all of them have been affected. It's not that people in poor neighborhoods have been affected, people in rich neighborhoods, they have not been affected. No, that has not been the case. Whether rich neighborhood, poor neighborhood, or one community over the other community, there is no exception. All of us are equally vulnerable, or all of us equally, or we were together, we were able to sail through this situation. So there is something that we need to recognize behind this. What is that that makes us vulnerable, or what is that helped us to sail through in this situation? But the fact is true that no matter how much money we have seen people with loads and loads of money, big bag balances, yet they were not able to get hospital beds at times, or even if they got with all the best of the treatments, they did not survive, they could not make it. So whether one is rich or poor, whether one is belong with this community or that community, or this nationality or the other, nothing didn't matter. So this is another important lesson. And the third one, of all the things that is most important to us, is health. At the end of the day, if we don't have a good health, then whatever might be our possession, whatever might be our position, nothing came to help us. So, all of us have realized the importance of health, and we have also realized that maintaining health is the cheapest thing that we can do, because the other side is so expensive. Therefore, maintaining health could be the only cheapest thing, the most economical thing that we do, and therefore that alone matters. We have realized the importance of what we call in Sanskrit swasthya. It's a beautiful term. I'll be explaining it in a short while. So that's the term, that's the thing. Health, being healthy is so important. And even there, while there are multiple aspects that contribute towards our health, if we have realized one of the most important factors that contributes to our health, that is immunity. So this has been a question. This has been the point for even for the market. How do you boost immunity? So many products have come up, many practices have come up, many suggestions have come up in the recent times as to how one can boost one's immunity. But keeping the market aside, of all the contributors to health, immunity seems to be the most strongest effective contributor towards maintaining the health. So then how do we maintain immunity? This is the next big question. So these are our learnings, interconnectedness of the world. We are either vulnerable or strong as anyone else. And health is the most important position that we have. And even their immunity is the chief contributor to health. So these are the learnings from the situation. Now, with these learnings, we will go to the concept of health, which is the most important thing that we have realized. Before going to the concept of health in yoga, I would like to draw your attention to the definition of health as per WHO. Okay, World Health Organization comes up with these insightful definitions to help us understand and appreciate these concepts. How does WHO define health? Even there you can see there is a gradual evolution of an idea in the recent times. Initially it was absence of illness. So if there is no illness in the body, if there is no disease in the body, then that was considered to be healthy. But when experts met, when they discussed further, they felt no, that is not fully right. It's not just the absence of diseases, because that is a negative way of understanding it. There must be a positive way also to look into this situation. And therefore, they redefined the concept of health in a couple of suggestions and couple of ways, and finally they came up with this idea that health is not just absence of sickness or disease, but a positive state involving physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. Just see the idea here. It's not just the absence of disease, but it is a positive state that involves well-being at physical, mental, social, and spiritual level. Of course, now you don't find the spiritual word there because they felt that is not very tangible, that is not measurable, because WHO needs to measure whatever it puts out. So they have left that. But for some time in the meanwhile, they had it in their definition, the idea of spiritual as well. While this is the arrived definition of health in the modern world and in the established institutions like WHO, if you just look on the other side, see how the Indian tradition, largely the Asian tradition, Eastern tradition, and especially their yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta, the Indian thought, how do they define these concepts? There's something so beautiful there. Even the English word health, we can explore it a little further. But before that, I now would like to go to the Sanskrit word for health. So that is swasthya. There are two components there, swa and stha. Swastha means healthy person. Swasthya means health. And for a healthy person, the reference or the term that is used is swastha. Stha means one who stands, one who is stable. Even the English words stable, stationary, stand, all these words come from the root stha, which is a Sanskrit root, which means to stand, to be stable. Okay, and see the prefix there, swa means in one's own self. So one who is established in his essential nature is a swastha. So then what is aswastha? Aswastha means what does it mean to be unhealthy? One who moves away from his nature. See how in the very words capture the process as well. One who is close to one's own nature is swastha. He is healthy. One who moves away for whatever reason away from his essential nature, he is aswastha or unhealthy. This is the term in Ayurveda, and similarly in yoga as well, in Vedanta as well. The word that yoga tradition uses, this appears in the Yoga Sutra itself. In fact, the third and fourth sutra bring this idea, Swarupa and Sarupya. So the individual who is established in his essential nature is healthy. Swarupa, one who resides in oneself, he is a healthy person. He is the seer. I mean, he is just like a witness who can see everything pass in front of him without being attached or without being contaminated with it. So he is a healthy person. Whereas what happens with the others? He's sarupya. It's a beautiful term. It needs a dedicated session, so I will not go into the details. But just to quickly refer to it, it means an identical form. So here the individual gets identified, gets colored with the object or with something that is wrong. I mean, just imagine if you're wearing a colored glass and you don't even know that glass is colored, then every object that you see through that, it seems to be tainted. But the taint is not in the object, but it's in the lens that you are wearing. Right? In a similar fashion, sarupya is the term that yoga uses to define the layerings that we have put on our site so that we are not able to get or connect with the objective reality. So whether it is yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta, the Indian tradition, and even I'm sure we would have similar terms across the Eastern tradition to denote this idea that healthy means someone who is in his essential form, and unhealthy is a person who has moved away from this state. And etymologically, the word healthy of English or health of English comes from the root heal. So to heal oneself, right? How does a wound heal? Whether if a bone is broken, how does it heal? The doctor might help us with a plaster, with a bandage, but it's not the plaster that's going to heal the bone. The healing happens from inside. It's just the outer covering facilitates that straightening process or healing process in a better way. But the healing never happens from outside. The healing always happens from inside. So this inside out movement from inside is where the healing has to happen. And this is the idea that was captured by all ancient traditions across the world. And in some traditions, especially in the yoga tradition, we find this idea very well rooted, defined, explained, and transmitted through a proper channel. And therefore, we are eternally grateful to the field of yoga for giving us these concepts. So, with this background, so now we know that health is to remain in one's own nature and to be healthy is to go away from it. We'll just try to understand what does our modern understanding through science tell us about the contributors towards good health. So if I ask this question, in layman's term, tell me what are the contributors towards maintaining a good health, then I'm sure that all of you agree that these are the four basic things. Nothing more. Medication, hospital, etc. might come later, but if I have to speak from a layman's perspective, these are the four basic things which help us maintain our health: food, activity, sleep, and stress. Two belong to the physical world, two belong to the a little more into the mental world. But generally, these are the four basic things. I mean, whatever you want to add can be part of one of these four. So if these four things are properly looked into, then our health and immunity is well taken care of. So what is the conception of food? What is the plan for activity? What are the guidelines for sleep? How do we handle stress? So these could be the common questions that we have to deal with. And I don't see any system which in a comprehensive manner gives us an approach to deal with all these four. You might have someone from gym, especially a gym coach who would like to push you to activity, then they'll push you to take more protein. I mean, taking more protein will have other serious consequences. So in this way, like I mean, in the modern approach to our understanding of human phenomenon, I hardly see one system which takes care of all the four in unison or in a balanced manner. So, and just to give it thought, I mean, what kind of food is good? A simple exploration would lead us to understand that it has to be LST, local, seasonal, and traditional. So eat local wherever you are, that food is always good. Eat seasonally, what is available in season, not you refrigerate it for months together, or you take it from a different geographical location, bring it here and then have once in a while, that's okay. But if that becomes your staple diet, then your health and immunity is gone for a toss. And even traditional food, I mean, our grandmothers knew what is best for us in what time. And I don't think there is any substitute to us. So now tell me, which course in nutrition in the modern university will teach us these things? It's all about standardization. It's all about universalization. It's all about global consumeristic culture that is coming in. So what would have been a source to help us understand the food habits and cultivate good approaches to it, we have completely lost. And similarly in all these fields, activity, sleep and stress, and especially in the fourth quarter of stress, we have no idea how to deal with it. And that's where all our problems are multiplying by 100-fold. Stress will not let you eat properly. Stress will not let you digest properly. I mean, all of us know the first thing that gets affected when we are under stress is our digestive capacity. And from there, it just moves. Then I don't have necessary energy to get into any activity, neither do I sleep well. So each one, they contributed one another. Or now in the time of the pandemic, we have seen some people have become completely gone without any activity, and some people have gone for extra activity. Both could be problematic. And any sort of artificial approach to things, a clinical approach to things could be problematic. And that's where I see gym also. While gym is helpful, while it helps you to tone yourself in a proper way at different levels, yet an unplanned approach or a myopic approach could be quite troublesome there also. So then what is a system which allows me to take care of this holistically? So if I ask this question, now I come to the understanding of yoga. So then what does yoga have to say? If I hypothesize that yoga could have something to offer to take care of this in a holistic manner, then how does yoga provide solutions, or even before providing solutions, how does it understand the human phenomenon? To this, I just want to touch upon this area very briefly. No doubt this is a beautiful topic to explore in itself, and to understand the great insight our ancestors have provided in the form of the multi-layered personality of human being. It sees a human personality as a extending spectrum. On one side, the physical concrete mass, what it calls as Annamaya Kosha, all the easily palpable, touchable, feelable concrete aspects, whether it's the skin, the structure, that is the skeleton, the muscle, all those are part of the Annamaya Kosha. So no doubt this is something that is easily recognizable, but the yogic understanding does not stop here. It goes even beyond it. It then also recognizes another layer and level of the body, what it calls as pranamaya kosha, or the vital sheath, vital covering, vital envelope, vital body. What does it contain? It contains various conduits and channels through which the energy flow happens. It is the most important link which activates, which gives the necessary vital energy for the physical component to act and to be healthy. And this is the layer called as the vital body or pranamaya kosha. Even inside to it, it sees a more subtle but more effective body or a layer called as mental sheath. So see how the spectrum is extending. We are not the things that exist in binary. So mind on one side, body on one side, but rather it is a spectrum extending from one to the other, carrying some properties of the other, but also you can see new properties or unique properties of the next layer as well. So then I have the mental sheath, which is all about my world of thoughts, emotions, feelings, and the ideas where I harbor or where I stay with myself for a long period of time. I mean, I might be engaged in any physical activity, but every physical activity might have at least one or more than one mental component. Even I exist there, right? So that is the Manomaya Kosha, the mental layer. And even inside or deeper to it is Vijnanamaya Kosha, the idea or the level or the world of intuition, where I draw my inspiration from. It is a deeper world. Sometimes when we are in a carefree mood, or when we stand in front of a vast ocean, or the first moment of joy that we experience, even through a sense object contact, we are transported to a very different kind of state, right? So it might be just for a few seconds, yet that is our valid experience. And that's what yoga recognizes as one more level of our existence, that is the level or body of Vijnana, that is intuition, intuitive layer. That's where our deep ideas come from. I mean, without any thinking, in a flash, I can get a solution to my issue, which I have been dabbling for months and months. Right? All these things happen, and that's another deep layer. And yoga says all these you can somehow recognize, but even beyond all these things, there is a sparkle of bliss that exists within you, and that is the core of your personality. So that is called as Anandamaya Kosha, or the bliss sheath. So starting from the bliss, which is highly subtle, to the grossest, that is the physical body, yoga sees human personality in as a multi-layered existence. And for all our understanding and working of yoga practice, this understanding of Panchamaya, Panchakosha, the five-layered existence, becomes extremely important. It is only in this context I wanted to bring it briefly. This has been explored in various texts of the tradition, right from the Vedic texts, from the Taittiriya Upanishad to various other Upanishads. This forms the fundamental idea or concept of yogic physiology. How do you understand the body? So this is the basis. Because if I have giving you a therapeutic system, if I'm giving you a health system, I should also have the physiology at my back end. And this is the yogic physiology. So moving further, after recognizing each one of these levels, yoga identifies what is that to be swastha. When I say you are in your own essential nature, what is it to be? What does it mean when you have to be in your nature at the physical level? What does it mean to be in your own nature at the life force level? So, what is health? In each one of these levels is what yoga explores. And this is the summary of that finding. So, at the physical level, the body is relaxed. When you might have noticed, when the stress accumulates, there are some physical locations where you can start feeling it instantaneously. If you have noticed, the shoulder raises, you get a stiff neck, right? That's why when we say, when before we even start practice, we say just consciously let your shoulders down, relax your shoulders, because without knowing, this would have gone up. And once the stiff neck happens, through the spine, through the other channels, it starts affecting various other parts too. Therefore, to be tensed, to be stiff at any physical part, then that is going away from nature. To be relaxed, just look at a young child, a baby, or even, I mean, up to the age of 7 or 8, the suppleness of the body. There is no rigidity. Why? Because there is no stress and tension. With the accumulation of stress and tension, the rigidity enters in, and then the stiffness starts, and there's tension. And then you have to do a lot of practice to make them relaxed. That's why we say a child of age lesser than 7 to 8, they need not do any asana, even yogasana practice in a very systematic manner, or you don't have to force them on them, because the body is naturally amenable to the practices. So this is at the physical level. At the next level, the life force. Okay, though the internal movements of life force is not easy to notice, at least the breath can be noticed. Breath is one of the grossest expression of the life force. When you are relaxed, when you just wake up from a good deep sleep, you can see how relaxed, rhythmic, harmonious your breathing is. When you're tensed, when you're about to fire on someone, when you're about to shout, when you feel humiliated, when you feel angry, just notice the pattern of your breath. It's disturbed, it is shallow. You're grasping for breath, right? Why? Because you're not able to supply yourself the required amount of oxygen. And that's the grossest manifestation of the speed or disturbance in the life force. So to be slow, to be relaxed, to be balanced, harmonious is its essential nature. So when you're going to bed, or when you're waking up, when you're listening to good music, when you're walking, taking a carefree stroll, then without your effort, the breath slows down, because slow breath is its essential nature. And see how closely they are connected to many things. In fact, yoga recognizes all these things and brings in the discussion to how does a dog breathe? It almost pants. It's so fast, right? So if we breathe X number of times a minute, the dog would be breathing at least 3 to 4x times or 5x times. Okay? That is the such short nature of the breath. And see its longevity, 10 years, 12 years. See how closely the duration, the elongation of the breath is associated with longevity. Have you noticed how a tortoise breathes? The way it breathes, it's very slow. It takes a while to inhale and exhale. And see what's its lifespan. It runs to 200 years easily. Okay, 180 years to 200 years. Similarly with the elephant. Elephant also has a long life because it breathes slowly. So in nature, it can be easily noticed wherever the breath, and I'm just taking the example of breath, but I don't limit the idea of pranamaya to breath alone. It has many subtle layers and channels, but I'm giving this example because this is easily recognizable. So, or if the life force breath is slow, then it is in its essential nature, then it is healthy. If it is fast, if it is trembling, it is disturbed, then that is unhealthy at the pranamaya level. Similarly, when I go to the next level, manomaya kosha, at the mind level, mental level, to be calm, not to be restless, not to be agitated is its nature. And this is, all of us know this. We don't need a big science to tell us. Like the moment there's an agitation, my peace is destroyed. I mean, I might be enjoying something, but one provocation coming from somewhere, one message, one call, one news that flashes in front of you is good enough to bring in that agitation and spoil that state of peace. So being agitated and restless is the disturbance, is the going away from one's nature. To be calm is being healthy at mental level. And at a deeper level, at the intellectual level, the intuitive level, not to have strong fixations with things. This is where knowingly or unknowingly the prejudice starts acting. Okay. I don't know how many of us would have noticed, even before the mind thinks and arrives at decisions, many decisions are made beforehand. No, I just don't want to do this. Or, I mean, it happens with people, especially with eating. Many people would not have tried tasted few dishes at all. Just as the name is uttered, they say, no, I don't want. I mean, how do you even decide whether it's tasty or not tasty, good or not good? I mean, one has to experience it, experiment it, and then say. But many times it doesn't even happen because there are already strong fixations, and even before mind comes into act, the decisions are already made, and that is the level of Vijnanamaya Kosha. Having no fixations. If you have seen some people, no, some really highly well matured people, how joyously they'll be at all circumstances. What is so silly, they will partake in it. What is serious, they'll partake in it. They're so comfortable with young children as well as old people or people of all ages. Some of us who think mature, who feel that okay, this is how one needs to be mature, we find it difficult to talk with young children or small children because we are not used to that, or we feel that is not up to our level. I mean, these are all the unknown, unthought fixations that we would have drawn for ourselves. And this happens at the deeper intuitive layer or the Vijnanamaya layer where we have fixations. The moment we have fixations there, then we are away from our nature. Having no fixations, just being open to any situation, any circumstance that is thrown to them, that is someone who is very healthy at this level. And at the deepest level, that is Anandamaya Kosha, hardly a disturbance takes place here. So naturally, we don't access this, that is the problem, but the disturbance here is very rare. Otherwise, generally, harmony, because harmony is our essential nature. I mean, would anyone wish to have conflicts with people around? That might happen as a result or for whatever reason, but given to oneself, all like how much ever what you call we have this usage in Kannada, Jagalganta, one who always picks up fight, who is probing to get into some kind of an conflict. I mean, even that person at the heart, he likes harmony because that is the nature of human phenomenon. It might not happen because there are disturbances that have happened at the later levels. That's a different story. But harmony is one's essential nature deep within. So these are the parameters which help us to know whether there is health in the person or not. So it's not just at the physical level. I mean, next we'll see how for all these things, whether what is happening at the Annamaya Kosha level, that is at the bodily level, or at the deep intuitive level, for all these things, the in-between layer, Manomaya, plays a very important role. And that's where psychological well-being is of utmost importance. So, from being away from being one's nature to move away from one's nature, yoga terminology uses this word, yoga, even Ayurveda, called Vega, that is speed which pushes away from our nature. But how does that happen? We will see. So, this is the etiology or the understanding of how diseases emanate according to the yogic understanding. It brings in the two concepts called as Adhi and Vyadhi. Vyadhi is a physical ailment, which even our Honorable Ambassador was mentioning about psychosomatic illnesses, whether it is diabetes, hypertension, and similar various kinds of non-communicable diseases that manifest at the bodily level. Though the manifestation is happening at the body, there is a long chain of cause and effect prior to that. And yoga very clearly says they all start with the mental agitations, what it calls as adhi, the beginning point. This is where they begin at the manomaya kosha, at the psychological level. And from there, it gets transferred to the next level at the pranamaya kosha. Immediately when the mind is agitated, you might have seen, even at the physical level, the body starts trembling. When you are so filled with anger, you don't even get the words right because trembling, like because the prana is trembling there. So the mental agitations, the disturbances, and these disturbances happen because of constant or what you can call continued state of being in an agitation or in a heightened mode. See, all of us have some kind of shock absorbers. There is a stimulation, we get excited, we come down, and then the normality continues. But many times what happens is that when the excitation has taken place, even before the cooling down, even before the necessary cooling down time is available, already the next stimulation is there. So we keep on hitting ourselves with one stimulation after the other so that the baseline gets pushed up again, pushed up and up. So on one side, the stimulations are increasing, then we have not taken enough time for it to come back to the baseline. Then at the heightened uh, level of this continued disturbance, the agitations become very strong and solidified. And then it translates to the prana level. So then the nadis, the conduits or the channels which carry the prana, they become unsteady, they get blocked. I mean, I don't know if you have noticed when you are having some kind of head pain or if you have stiffness, you can just check the back of your neck. You can sometimes find some knots there. Even at the physical level, you can see a knot where there is some kind of energy imbalance that has taken place. So the nadis, the conduits get blocked, and the flow of energy which was supposed to take place through these conduits, even they become haphazard. And with that, we see at least at three levels very strong responses emerging. The first one is ajirnatva, indigestion. Okay, what we eat doesn't get digested properly, or over digestion, we keep on hogging. I mean, that's why with people with depression, you can see the first thing that happens to them is obesity, right? Because they're so closely associated. Obesity is not just to do with the body, it's more to do with the mind. So whether it is under digestion, over digestion, or kujiranata, that is wrong digestion, because this is the main energy supplier to all parts of the body. So this whole system, the digestive system, gets disturbed to a great extent. And when this gets disturbed, when the nadis are not allowing the movement properly, when the energy flow is disturbed, and then the because of indigestion or wrong digestion or problematic digestion, the necessary energy is not being carried and supplied to other parts of the body. All these psychosomatic illnesses, in fact, that's the reason why they're called psychosomatic, because there is no other factor where I can see why it is emerging. It is not through heredity. Diabetes can be hereditary, but there's also non hereditary diabetes that is there. So then where is it coming from? Today, all the pointers show towards this fact that this has started with the stress, because we are not able to deal with them properly. So because of the mental agitations, because of the adhi that is there, for whatever reason, it could be lifestyle, it could be demands of our modern worlds, it could be because of the family systems that we have entered into knowingly or unknowingly, because of the food that we are eating, many things coupled together. But the psychological level, the problem has started, and it only takes a while before it expresses at the physical level. And while modern medication is so helpful, powerful, and at circumstances, what it treats is the last part of this band. It could be helpful, but what do I do with its roots is my big question. And that's where again I take solace in yoga and Ayurveda, because it does not just see the symptoms but traces back to its roots and tries to see how best to deal with issue. So then what is the solution? Before we look into the solution, I just want to quickly take you through the three important definitions of yoga, just to highlight the fact that it is the psychological sheath or the kosha where yoga really wants to address this problem. So the first definition, or one of the most important definitions, when I say first, not in terms of chronology, but in terms of contextuality. This is a definition that we find in Yoga Vasishtha, which is Manah Prashamana Upayaha Vegaha. The upaya, the skill which helps me to calm down the mind is yoga. I want you to note this. This is the important definition. It doesn't say bending forward and touching your toe is yoga. While no doubt that is important, that's absolutely helpful, but that is not yoga. That could be even gymnastics. Okay, but the practice that helps you to slow down your mind, the practice that makes you flexible. When it say flexible, flexible is not just the flexible at the body level. If my ego becomes long and long, if it becomes stiff and body becomes flexible, what is the use? I'll be, in fact, I'll find myself in more number of problems with body being flexible and mind being very stiff. So therefore, slowing down the mind, making the mind supple, relaxed, that is the definition of yoga according to Yoga Vasishtha. Similarly, this is the main definition in the technical textbook of yoga, that is in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which is the primary reader for any student of yoga. It says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. It is to gain mastery over the modifications, over the disturbances, over the waves of the mind. Okay, so gaining mastery over the mind is yoga. This is the second definition. Third one from the Bhagavad Gita, another important text. There are at least 4 beautiful definitions of yoga there, but I will keep I'll just keep to one of the definitions there. It is Samatvam Yoga Uchyate, being equanimous in success and failure, in gain and loss, in heat and cold, in appreciation and humiliation. So in amidst all these binaries, to be equanimous is yoga. This is the third important definition. And again, another important, which brings out another dimension of yoga, is yoga karmasu kaushalam. Again, this is from Bhagavad Gita. It is a skillful way of doing an action. By skillful way doesn't mean someone who is a trained, skilled worker. No. While that aspect could be there, it is a much larger concept. One, doing an action, involving in an action in a sort of a relaxation. By relaxation, I mean what we call in modern psychology flourishing. You're in a flow. I mean, if you're a teacher, you would have experienced this, that when you're involved in it so much, you just get into a flow and there's nothing to stop you. There are ideas which you have not thought about, which you have not written down. They just seem to come to you. So that is getting into the flow. So that is action in relaxation. And you're doing it because it needs to be done. There is no other better reason why you're doing it. Of course, there could be secondary goals that you might want to look from it. From a job, it could be money, it could be something else. All those are fine. But primarily, it is to be done. Therefore, you're engaged in it. So in similar way, a selfless way of not being myopic to the immediate fruits of the action. And while doing it, again, you go to any achiever, any entrepreneur for that matter, who's really been successful, you'd say how important it is to be unattached in action. Otherwise, if you are so concerned about what will be the outcome of this, how do you want to impact this, then the action gets really what you can say, limited by all these perspectives. So the experience of people without having read this, they share that this is the best way of doing it, and that's what Gita also puts in for us. So this is the fourth definition, which is again about the state of mind or an attitude. So look at all the 4 important definitions, whether it's from Yoga Vasishtha or Yoga Sutra or Bhagavad Gita. How do you engage with an action? How do you deal with the mind? And what happens to the mind when you're engaging? So these are the 3 different dimensions that the definitions of yoga are pointing towards which is very clearly towards the mind. So it's not, while body is an important tool, while prana or pranayama practices are an important tool. What we are really working with is the mind, because that's where the key lies. So with this, I now would like to go to, just in a very brief manner, how does yoga club all these things together? Okay. So having conceived a system which has all these aspects, this multi-layered existence of human phenomenon, then one needs to give proper practices and techniques through which it can help individual at all these levels. That's why at the physical level, we have various practices like kriyas, which is about cleansing the body. You cleanse your nostrils, you cleanse your digestive tract. These are very specific technical practices, and I don't want to burden you with the details now, but very effective. You can call them detoxification as well. They remove the impurities of the body and very helpful to restore health. And we have loosening warm-up exercises, and largely asanas, they come into the word. They deal with various parts of the body, bringing in two things, strength and flexibility. So that is at the physical level. Then at the vital level, you again have kriyas, you have various kinds of breathing practices. While we generally club breathing practices and pranayama, they're slightly different from one another. Breathing practices are preparatory practices. They'll help you to use pull all the sections of your of your lungs. If you're familiar, we have three kinds of breathing: abdominal breathing, thoracic breathing, and clavicular breathing. Okay, so these are preparatory practices. What they do is, when we normally breathe, we just use a very limited capacity for our lungs. And now during this pandemic, we have realized how important to keep the health of our lungs. Okay, because that is instrumental for people who could survive because their lungs were healthy or they became healthy soon. Those who couldn't survive, the only reason because the lungs didn't support, because lungs were not healthy, or they did not have the necessary training to come back to that track. Therefore, it becomes so important. And breathing practices are those kinds of practices which helps to bring some kind of balance, to help you use different components of the body to breathe properly. But pranayama is one step more. It goes to the deeper layers or deeper dimensions of your breath. It deals with the subtle energy channels as well as the movements of energy and tries to work with it. That is pranayama for the vital shift. But at the mental level, they might be simple, but all of this have some kind of back and forth impacts. So there could be bhajans, a spiritual connection, deeper connection to anchor oneself. Dharana is concentration, dhyana is meditation. So these mindfulness, these are the very important aspects of yoga practice. While a teacher might just lead us through an asana session, but if you have noticed, even in an asana, the continuous call is to be mindful, be aware of what is happening to your body, become aware of your breath. So every effort is to help you align your mind, breath, and body. Only then the yoga happens. Only then the slowing down happens. Without that, there is no slowing down. Without that, there is no yoga. And when the psychological sheath is not touched, the result on the body is also highly limited. Therefore, all the practices, whichever it is, I mean, I just give this example on a lighter side, but it also has a deeper side too. See what is happening when the teacher leads you through an asana practice. He or she makes you go through a difficult posture, a posture that you're not used to initially. And when you go to that posture, naturally the face starts frowning. You don't carry a happy face. You're not smiling at them at that point. But what does the teacher do? He or she reminds you, please wear a beautiful smile now, which is not easy. It is unnatural. It is artificial at that point. Your body is struggling, but you are wearing a smile. See what is happening subtly here. Body has a program, a deep program which is embedded at the mental level. Body comfortable, smile. Body uncomfortable, don't smile. This is a natural phenomenon. Okay. But through an intervention, the teacher is taking you to the next level where body uncomfortable, smile. Body is uncomfortable, yet the teacher is asking you to smile. So an intervention is being done in a forcible manner initially, but eventually when you are able to hold in this position, or even before that, what is happening is a transition from body comfortable, body uncomfortable, smile. The earlier program was limited program, body comfortable, smile, body uncomfortable, frown. From that, through just a physical asana practice, your thresholds are being pushed. Body comfortable, body uncomfortable, you end up smiling. And this gets extended on life mat too. This is not just what happens on your yoga mat, but this is what is expected of your life mat too. Situation comfortable, situation not comfortable, yet you end up smiling. And when that happens, there is no agitation. And when there is no agitation, then there is no chance of that resulting in the illness of the body. Psychological health is maintained there. And therefore, the work that happens at the mental level becomes extremely important. And going further, unknowingly, even at the intellectual level, there is some sort of practice that is brought in where you are asked to reflect upon yourself in things that you do, things that you have spoken. It's almost like unknowingly there is a mirror that has been kept for your clarity. It's embedded part of this system. So you're doubly watchful as to what you speak, what you talk, and how you are reacting to situations. So that's where reflection, contemplation, cognitive corrections, all these come at this level, at the intellectual level. And at the deeper level, there is nothing much to be needed. If the 4 levels are taken care of, the natural bliss that is there, we have access to that. So in this manner, while yoga seems to be working at the physical level, actually it is working at the mental level much more than we know or than we imagine, because it understands the premium of psychological well-being, and with that, whatever can flow out to different levels. So if Adhi is taken care of, then there is no possibility of Vyadhi too. This is the fundamental conceptualization in the field of yoga. And all these are integrated practices. They don't happen in isolation. Whether it's asana practice, whether it's pranayama practice. So with body, you try to impact the mind. Similarly, with the mind, you're trying to impact the body. And for this to happen, the prana is extremely important because that's the bridge that connects between these two worlds. Therefore, yoga recognizes all of them and has devised practices to work with each one of them. Whatever you easily connect with. If you think you can sit and focus and sit and meditate, maybe you start with that. Or if you think no, your mind requires a lot of movement and action, maybe you start with the body. But eventually, this is where you need to come to. If you have to experience the full benefit of yoga, this is where it is this central band of the Manomaya Kosha, the psychological well-being. That's where one need to land to and finds his home. If one finds a home there, be at home, be with yoga, it's fully possible. So with this, I just like to conclude a general overview of how yoga operates, how it focuses on psychological well-being, and through that, it tries to impact the whole personality. So this was the focus of my presentation, and I thank once again Aparna ji for this opportunity, and the Embassy of India, Thailand, and all the fraternity who there who have made this possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vinay Chandra. I have a couple of questions
Please.
before I let you go. This has been a very tough 1.5 years since the pandemic began, and as you know, a lot of people are, constrained to stay within their homes. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, and the children who had to face this sort of a situation, which no one has faced in the past 100 years or so, this kind of a pandemic. Uh, how can families deal with it? How can people of all age groups, because a family is a unit of different age groups of people, right? So how can everybody come together to have, practice yoga, inculcate this habit of practicing yoga? How do you get across the message of yoga to small children, especially? We're seeing a lot of reports of mental health issues, especially with children, because they're closeted inside their homes. So, what is your take on this?
Sure. I was just speaking to one of my friends who has been kind of regularly conducting online classes, and he had a very interesting observation to share. Like earlier, it was just one of the partners or the spouses who were his students, but now during the pandemic, especially at this time, all of them have their got their partners to join, because one thing they have realized that uh, again, this was an interesting observation, that his students who have been with him for at least 3 to 4 years, none of them got sick even though their family members were sick. So this within the family has created some sort of interest. How were they able to stay in that manner? And also some sort of psychological strength that they had to deal with the situation. I mean, normally in all these circumstances, seeing is believing. One can quote 10 books, one can do all those things. But if I find someone with all the practices restless, then I'm sure it has not helped him. But without any preaching, without anything, if I see someone who is so stable and is able to handle the situation, then I'm naturally curious to know where was his source of strength. So, because of such a stature, like many people have influenced their own family members or spouses, their partners to be or to join these courses, and that's how he says his student clientele has been growing. I mean, that is one observation, but on the other side, we know this proverbial statement that the family that eats together, prays together, stays together. Now it's the family that does yoga together, stays together. Because see, you can't go out. The body needs some kind of engagement. Mind needs some kind of engagement. Uh, Without activity, one can't even sleep properly. So, considering these situations, the best outlet, all that you need, as our ambassador was saying, was just one piece of mat. So that's a good enough space for someone to practice. And again, one need not overemphasize the need for importance of pranayama, because this has really saved thousands of lives in India. I mean, given our numbers, given our size, given our population density, the impact could have been much more. Though we had, I mean, we were impacted. I'm not denying that fact, but yet we were able to, the casualty numbers are comparatively less compared to any other so-called developed countries. Why? Because there are multiple factors, and one of them is through various channels, our people are familiar with some of these practices. See, pranayama, yoga, asanas, they're familiar. So we know it's there around. We just need to collectively understand its significance. We might need to have better communication channels through which we are able to convey how people were able to deal with this. Maybe a post-COVID documentation of yoga practitioners or individuals where they were practicing, or even when they went through this experience of COVID, how were they were able to deal with it. Because I have some data which says, like, uh, even for people affected with mild COVID, when some breathing practices were being given for at least 4 to 5 years, they found themselves to be very healthy, like no issues with their breathing. Or so one could definitely see immediate post-practice effect of these practices. So one is a scientific way of communication of these ideas, but more than that, I think people have now recognized the importance of this, and slowly they're trying to bring it to their lifestyle. It will take time, but yet I'm sure and the number of people who will come to the yoga practice will be much more than what it used to be before.
The other thing was you were talking about slowing down the mind, Vega, bringing down the Vega of the mind. In the modern world, that seems like a very difficult thing to do, especially with organizations, having these deadlines and there's a pressure to succeed and all that. So how can, because of course, obviously, yoga is so beneficial. How do you bring that into a modern organization? How do you institutionalize yoga? What is your take on it? Because you've been working with a lot of organizations, and please share your thoughts.
Yeah. See, all of us would have seen some people who might be in the top positions, yet they're so calm, relaxed. It doesn't mean they have slowed down their activities. See, how you engage with the world outside is one layer, but with what state you are connecting or engaging in these activities internally is a totally different ball game. And we are familiar with also this beautiful quote of D.V. Gundappa, great saint poet of Karnataka, who says, make two rooms. One room is to engage with the world outside, but you be safe in the inner room. So there could be a lot of speed, lot of activity in the external room, but internally one need not go through that same kind of a situations. No doubt, I mean, it's easier to say than to do it, but from the lives of people that whom we have come across, we are quite assured that it is a great possibility. We have seen such people, and for rest, for whom this is not a spontaneous way of getting into there, that's where we need the practice, some kind of training. And I only wish that our education system recognizes the importance of this mental training at a young age and
Mhm.
starts providing it. So it's not just about making them to sit in one place to do a meditation. No, that's not what we are asking for. But to recognize how everything that emanates from the mind and one's attitude. So how can one master the mind? What are the various kinds of techniques, practices? Even just a simple self-reflection. If this is made part of one's lifestyle, one's routine, I mean, this beautiful verse is there in Sanskrit which says, Pratyaham pratyaveksheta naraha charitam atmanaha kimnu me pashubhistulyam kimnu satpurushairiti. It's a beautiful subhashita, simple subhashita. It says, at the end of the day, just reflect how many of your actions suited that of human beings, how many of your actions suited that of animals or beasts. If I just do this much, yes, I behaved in a very impulsive manner. I might have done it that at that moment, but at the end, before I go to bed, if I'm just able, if I'm taught to do some reflection, I'm definitely I'll be much better the next day. So imbibing these techniques, practices, because our ancestors have developed these tools. It's just that we are sitting on a treasure house and we are not allowing this access to our future generation. So at least for the good of our future generations, we need to bring in mind management techniques or mind calming practices, tools. We need to familiarize this to our younger generation. So I think this is one effective means of doing it. And once they're familiar with it, with whatever position they take, whatever might be the demands of their professional life, family life, because at no point can we expect a sea without its waves. So it could be simple waves, it could be tsunami. So one needs to be prepared how to deal with it, and that happens through preparing them from a young age through these practices, techniques, and training.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vinay Chandra. You've spoken about the interconnectedness of the world, and we are so interconnected that there was a pandemic which spread so fast. And I hope the science of yoga will also pick up as fast and create health and well-being everywhere. Although it's spread a lot in the last 7 years that the International Day of Yoga has been instituted. The spread of yoga has been phenomenal, although the
Definitely.
world was aware of it and was practicing yoga, but it's been an exponential rise since then. So thank you so much for throwing a lot of light on the science of yoga and for talking about the integrated approach of yoga, which has an impact on not just the physical well-being, but also the vital, mental, and intellectual well-being of the individual. Um, Before we end our session today, I would like to remind viewers that the Embassy of India, Bangkok has announced a yoga contest. The contest is based on the yoga series that was presented on our Facebook page. I'd like to invite everyone to participate in the contest and win exciting prizes. With this, we come to the end of the session. Once again, thank you, Dr. Vinay Channa, for a very interesting and informative session. Thank you. Namaste, Swadika.